Welcome to the Happy Recap podcast. This is the week of January 17th, 2021. I'm JB along with EJ, and joining us in a few minutes will be our good friend Michael Barron. And we're glad to have you along with us for the ride on this Sunday recording session, whether you're listening to it on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. Glad to have you along with us. And certainly the big news that we covered last time around was the trade for Francisco Lindor and Cookie Carrasco, and we got two press conferences this past week. EJ, we'll talk about those with Michael Barron, and I had to admit, EJ, I could not resist. I had to get in. It was going to be a T-shirt, and by the time it was done, it's a jersey. I got in and I ordered some Francisco Lindor gear this week, and threw in a James McCann T-shirt for good measure as well. But I had the scare of my life because the Mets team store, of course, is not open to the public right now because of the pandemic. And so you email them in, they tell them what you want, and then they call and get your payment information. Well, Friday morning, my phone rings and it says Sterling Equities on my caller ID. Now, for the few people that may not know, Sterling Equities was the parent company of the New York Mets prior to the purchase by Steve Cohen. So clearly somebody didn't get around to changing the ID on the phones, which I'm going to guess is not number one on Steve's lists of changes to make around the building. And we'll talk about that as well this hour. But it did make me think, okay, in that 3 seconds or so that I hesitated to answer that call was, what did I say about Jeff towards the end there? Is there anything he could be calling me about? Could this be a Sterling lawyer? Probably not. It's got to be the team store. I'll pick it up. And thankfully it was.
As long as it wasn't you waking up from a beautiful fever dream only to find out that Cohen no longer had ownership.
Oh, don't even suggest that possibility. Don't even vaguely suggest that as a possibility. That's not even begin to be a funny thing, because that's a dream. If this is a dream, I don't want to wake up. I don't want to find out that the Wilpons are still in charge. I'm perfectly happy with the way things are right now. So we'll see how that goes. But EJ, I know you and I have talked about a lot of times how long that we've been doing this show, and we've made some good friends over the years, and that means a lot to me. Not only have we had guests, we've made friends, and one of the people that I think, if you look back in our archives, probably the most frequent guest on this show, we finally got around to getting back on the show with us, our good friend Michael Barron. How are you, Michael?
I'm doing well. Good to see you guys, and actually see you, and not just talk to you over the phone.
Yeah, I think the last time I saw you was at a game in like 2012. So
yeah,
it's been a while.
It's been that long.
Well, it's a much different world from the last time that we actually saw you. Both the real world and, of course, our beloved Mets world has been flipped upside down, all for the better.
I mean, yeah. I mean, if there's one good thing to come out of 2020, right? It's this. I don't want to say it's change in fortune, because I guess we don't really know yet. But this change in attitude, this change in conversation. Since when were the Mets ever like a destination? And here we are, like Flushing. The chop shops. People want to be around those now. So.
I was looking at
and I decided to sport the black to piss off the traditionalists today. But you have black on. You have the 2011 Brad Emus era hat,
right? No traditional gear going on today in this podcast.
I mean, I'm old school today, but I'm representing a record shop. So what could you say?
Tower Records.
Everything comes around again, man, including winning, thankfully. But it's funny. It was one of those weird things where I saw a review of the trade earlier this week and gave the Mets an A+. When was the last time we got an A+ in a trade?
Gary Carter, I guess. Mike
Probably.
Piazza, maybe Mike Piazza. I mean, I almost think that there's almost nobody. I mean, they were able to keep their top prospects in their pockets, right, while giving up two marginal prospects and two guys that, can go as long as they sign Lindor to a long-term contract. But I don't think there's been a lot of build-up to this trade, and then there was this slide down where it was like, Sandy's saying he doesn't want to make a trade. He'd rather just buy his assets. And then boom, that's the first real big, game-changing type of roster change that he makes. It comes in the form of this big trade where, like I said, this discussion started way back in the summer when Brody was trying to orchestrate a trade. And now here you go, they have a transformational type player up the middle. They just have to get him signed since they gave up two of their top shortstops. But, I feel like, I'm confident that'll get done. What it looks like, I don't know, but I think they'll end up signing him. I think they know the pressure's on to sign him.
Yeah, I fully agree that he's gonna be a long time Met. He's gonna, who knows, even someday maybe we see him enshrined in a Mets gear. One could only hope, but I think he's gonna be here for the long haul. And I think really one of the things that I took away from that press conference, and we'll talk about both press conferences, is the level of enthusiasm that Lindor has about becoming a New York Met.
Yeah.
And you really can't underestimate just how valuable that is when you're getting a guy who desperately wants to be here. As you said, the Mets being a destination.
Well, and you hit it on the head, and we've talked about it over the years about, the Mets. Well, you always want players that want to be on your team. It makes them that much more valuable. You don't want to get guys like, like Mike Hampton, who was never really wanted to be a Met, and he just took it because that was just the hand he was dealt, and then he walked. You always want guys who want to be here, and I say that about Springer, how talking to people about this, on Twitter and on back channels, how it just seems like it's a perfect marriage. Why? Because, like I said, the Mets are a destination. He's a local guy. He's from New Britain, and he wants to be closer to home, reportedly, and it just makes too much sense then. So I'm hopeful and confident that'll happen too. And Toronto seems to be making a little bit of noise about it, but ultimately the Mets are, the better. The shoe fits much better in New York, certainly than Toronto, if you ask me. But we'll see. I think that the Mets have a lot of momentum, to signing players, and now they have Lindor. They've shored up the bullpen. They got McCann, and all these people said the right things, albeit the same thing, that the Mets are interesting. They want to be here. Maybe that'll influence Springer to follow in their footsteps.
There's a lot of talk about the luxury tax threshold and all of that for this year. And should the Mets cross it? Should the Mets not cross it? Is that a legitimate concern, or is that posturing on the basis that the next CBA, which, of course, the current one expires after the season, is likely to have a greatly revised luxury tax threshold that probably is not exceeded by the Mets' current payroll?
It's a good question. And I think there are multiple answers, but I think the most important answer to it is it depends on the circumstances. I think if it's Springer in hand and suddenly you're the team to beat in the National League, you do it, because 20%, figure what they're at about 180 to 184 million on the CBT payroll. That leaves them on the long end, on the high end, 26 million. But if for 32 million, it's the difference between winning the division and not, it's going to cost more to make a half measure type of move and lose than it will be to win. You'll make up that money in to pay the luxury tax, in the additional revenue, that you get for winning. So I don't think they'll let it stop them at this point. It certainly doesn't sound like Porter and Alderson are letting it be a barrier. But then there's what Steve Cohen said to Steve Serby in the Post about a month ago, when he said, well, I don't think we're going to go over it this year. And now you have some different messaging. I can't believe they're going to let it be a barrier for the right players. Now, I don't think they're going to go over for the sake of going over. I think that would just be bad baseball business. So if Springer goes to Toronto, there's no reason to just sign 4 more players just to raise payroll, right? So I think they'll go over it for Springer in hand, but they won't go over it for Bradley hand and maybe signing 2 other guys that they don't need just to put smiles on on the face of the people. So it depends on the circumstance, right? We don't want them spending badly. We want them spending properly, regardless of what the number is. We've said that forever.
What I found interesting is, over when Steve first took over the team, there seemed to be a couple of days there where there was kind of a love fest flirting session between Alderson and Trevor Bauer and Steve and Trevor Bauer. And over the past couple of weeks, it just seems like his name's completely fallen out of Mets fans' mouths, and it just seems like all the focus has gone on Springer.
Yeah, it's a good point. I was one to say, they should sign Bauer, they should sign Springer, they should trade for Lindor, they should do all these, amazing things, make a mark right now, set a standard. But I can't speak to why, they might, the interest kind of dwindled. It was probably a little bit of sticker shock when what he was telling, the Mets brass, and what ultimately came out, that he was looking for, like $35 million. And like, that's just, he's on this staff, he would be a 2, and I can't see them paying the number 2 more than they're paying the number 1, and I don't know that those demands have changed, but he's still a free agent, and I expect he wants to play next year. But I also don't know that the Mets are inclined to give up, the draft choice in certain scenarios either, right? I mean, I think when you look at Bauer, and you'd have to pay him, say, let's call it $30 million. They had to give him $30 million plus surrender the draft pick. That's a pretty big price to pay for a guy who has, he's good, don't get me wrong, but is he 30 million good? Is he 35 million good? Whereas, if you turn around, you pivot to Springer, and you're willing, and he gets, say 24 to 26 million a year, you're getting a good value, in a guy like Springer, and he almost fills the roster need right now greater than, maybe Bauer would fill the need. And I was someone who originally said, if it's Bauer or Springer, what would you do? I said Bauer, but I've kind of changed my mind towards that. And it has nothing to do with Carrasco. I started to change my mind before they made the trade, before they got Carrasco. So, and it's for those reasons. I feel like Springer now maybe fills the roster need more than Bauer, for the money. Now, if Bauer's price came down, I think his market would open up, and then maybe I would change my mind again. But, at 30 million, 35 million, that's a tough pill to swallow for, a guy who, he won the Cy Young in a short season last year, but he's been, that kind of 2-3, upper middle rotation kind of starter throughout his career. He's got this platform where he pretty much says everything I wouldn't say if I was a free agent, and I don't know, I just don't know if I'm the Mets, if I want to deal with that. You want good vibes, and you want, good press, and you want good talking points. And, while I think Bauer would be excellent, and I agree with Alderson when he says, that's the kind of personality you want in New York, there's only so much of that you can take, especially if he underperforms the contract, and he still, is, that outgoing personality. It can become a detriment to the roster, and maybe that's part of it. I don't know. I mean, it's something I've always thought about with Bauer, and, Sandy and Porter and Steve Cohen are much smarter than I am. And so I'm assuming they've thought about it too, so.
Well, and one of the things, obviously, that Steve Cohen is there to do, and part of his initial goal is to change the culture. And we've always said, we've talked about it so many times over the years, that the change needs to come from the top, and that's why no matter how many managers, how many general managers the Mets swapped out, we knew the culture wasn't truly going to change, because the head of the beast, so to speak, was still the same. Now the beast's head has been swapped out, and you have a culture set up where, Bauer, I like Bauer's pitching. I like the fact that he feels, feels he can be himself. I don't always agree with himself. I rarely agree with himself, quite frankly. But every once in a while, I'll see something he posts about baseball and go, "Hey, I agree with that. What's up with that?"
Yeah, no,
But
look, I mean, it's not that he doesn't tell the truth. Like,
right.
He tells it like it is, and I always say I appreciate straight shooters.
Yep, exactly.
But, this is show business too. This is the entertainment business, and I don't want to sound transactional when I say this, but his job is to pitch, and pitch well, especially if he's making a lot of money. And I think that if he were to come out in social media like he has in the past in New York, and say the wrong thing, or go out after a rough outing, and be pissed off and say the wrong thing, that might have an adverse, a negative impact on him, and his stature in New York,
Or
so
in the clubhouse.
and in the clubhouse too. I mean, especially in the clubhouse, that's very important. So again, like maybe that's played a role. Maybe they said, okay, well, we can get Carrasco, who may be just as good of a value for a third of the price, and there's our number 2 starter or number 3 starter, maybe on this roster. So maybe that's the angle they took, and why they started to pivot away from someone like Bauer or a top free agent. I mean, you heard Sandy say during his press conference that this trade has been brewing for a while, and I think he said like it's been going on since November or right around Thanksgiving, which is when you think about the timeline, it's right around the time you stopped hearing about Bauer and being connected to the Mets. So one could have something to do with the other. But like I said, I mean, when you look at Carrasco versus Bauer, maybe at this stage of their careers, Bauer is a little bit better than Carrasco. Maybe you can depend on him being more of a number 2 than Carrasco at this stage, although Carrasco is still very good. But when you look at the value, are you going to get $30 million out of Trevor Bauer? You could probably make a safer bet in saying, well, I'll get the 12 million out of Carrasco than you will over with Bauer and 30. So and it doesn't matter how much money you have, you don't want to spend it poorly. And maybe, like I said, that probably played a role in all of this.
I think another aspect that you have to consider is your eventual number 2 starter, who you hope to get back sometime in mid-season, in Noah Syndergaard, is something of a very large personality of his own right, very big social media presence of his own right, and that could cause a little conflict if the two of them don't get off on the wrong foot, and certainly if Thor doesn't come back to be the guy that we all hope he can be.
Yeah, and I think what you just pointed out about Noah being as large a presence as he is a body in the clubhouse, that's an under-discussed situation. And, I think, in the past, in Sandy's first tenure, he made some references to his displeasure with some of the things Noah has said in public, similar to that, Matt Harvey would say in public. So, there's a little bit of a history there, and yeah, absolutely, though that can clash and cause some explosiveness. The evaluation goes beyond what he does on the mound, even though he's paid to pitch well. All of them are paid to pitch well. So, but it all has to mesh, behind closed doors. Otherwise, how many great rosters have we seen with the Mets where it's been an explosive clubhouse and then they start losing? So I'm sure they're very cognizant that this isn't just a rotisserie team. It's the physical talent, acquiring the physical talent, but also having it mesh properly, on the personality side. And I also believe that, to an extent, these front offices are beginning, I don't want to say evolve, they're beginning to evolve, but I think they're starting to reconsider the human element, whereas, 5, 10, plus years ago, it was pretty much all scientific, how they were building these rosters. And I think it hurt a lot of teams and it hurt a lot of players in the process. So I think that has value, what you're saying about, clashing personalities. I think it matters.
Well, I mean, I think when the analytics say that you must be pulled from your playoff game after pitching only 5 innings, that maybe and you wind up having to be traded because you're just that put out, as well you should be. It just shows that there is a human element, and I mean, I think Steve even brought mention to that situation in his initial press conference as to when analytics goes too far. I think that we forget the human element sometimes. And I thought it was interesting that Bauer on his podcast, when talking about the trade, brought up the incident, which certainly was one of the more clubhouse disruptive, when he had decided to chuck that baseball out into center field. And who took him aside outside the clubhouse and let him have it, but Francisco Lindor.
Yeah,
not the very first guy I would have guessed at all.
No, but I mean, I think that when you think about when you hear about things like that, maybe Lindor will emerge as a leader, and setting the example in this clubhouse, for hopefully this year and for many years after this year. But yeah, I mean, I can't get that ball chucking incident out of my head. When I think, well, the Mets, could or should or may sign him, I say, well, yeah, but what if he does that again? That wouldn't go over well here. It didn't go over well in Cleveland.
No.
It certainly wouldn't work here. So these are the minuses. Every player has his or her flaws, in professional sports. And, Bauer is an eccentric, outgoing type A-ish type, personality. And, whoever signs him, whether it's the Mets or Yankees or whoever, they're going to have to figure out how to manage it. I mean, the Mets went through this with Yoenis Cespedes. They went into that knowing or really questioning, well, what happens when we start losing? How is he going to behave? And we saw exactly how he chose to behave when, the things weren't going so well for him and the team. So I think you have to weigh that with all, big signings, when you're investing hundreds of millions of dollars into talent, but, especially with guys who have a track record that, could, be disruptive. And that could hinder Bauer and his free agency, aside from the fact that he's 30 and, he had a great year, but, he's had an inconsistent career. There's that part and this personality challenge. I'm not trying to, crap all over the guy, because
No,
if the
not
Mets
at all.
sign him, I'll be really happy. But I mean, he can't sit there and tell me, as an outsider looking at his resume, that there aren't issues there. I think he would acknowledge these issues. He can't deny the ball checking thing, right? He can't deny these things that he has said, on Twitter and, throughout his career. He can't deny those things. And those are fair questions when you say, okay, well, you want 30 or $35 million. Let's talk about these things first,
Well, Trevor Bauer to me is the equivalent of a baseball equivalent of a television commercial for a prescription, where you have the first 30 seconds are all the great things he can do, and then the second 30 seconds are these are some of the possible side effects, and you just have to decide which one weighs out better.
And look, he's going to pitch in this league somewhere next year, whether it's on a
Yes.
1-year deal or a 6-year deal. But maybe he gets that shorter term deals, or with, maybe he gets a longer term deal with an opt out a quarter of the way through, just to, for, everybody to mitigate that risk. I don't, we'll just have to see what happens. I would say it's probably less likely he's going to be a Met. I just don't think that's the primary need anymore with Carrasco here.
Well, speaking of him, I mean, you're going from a guy who could potentially clash with teammates to a guy who I've likened to Pedro Serrano in Major League Two in the personality that Cookie Carrasco showed off on his press conference. I mean, he just seems like a guy that every single team would want in their clubhouse right now. And I think he goes from kind of the other guy in that trade to right away steps into a role of a big clubhouse presence.
Talk about sneaking onto the roster, right? Because all the hooplas around Lindor. But meanwhile, the Mets got exactly what they need in, a resume, in a talent, in, think of his story too, like where he's come from like the lowest of lows, to, he's lucky to be alive. And, here he is, putting up a 2.90 ERA last year, so look, it's a great acquisition. And the funny thing is when we all heard like he was a part of the trade, the first thing that popped into my mind wasn't, well, this solves the rotation issue. This, he fortifies rotation. I thought about, oh, gee, what a great story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was one of my first responses to it. Like, this is just a great story for the Mets, and I mean, he's a great story for the Indians and himself, but this is just one of the most inspiring baseball or professional sports stories in the last, I can't in recent memory, given where he's come from. And then you add on what he's going to be able to do on the mound, and it's a perfect fit. It's a great fit, and it's really smart and clever trade that they pulled off to get him, and working those finances and keeping the space open for more talent. And I'm thrilled with the trade. They gave up a lot, but the trade is still a great trade overall. And he kind of just sneaks onto the roster, and the focus isn't going to be on him in spring training, whenever that is. Focus is going to be on Lindor and Carrasco, and just go out there and get ready for whatever season we end up having whenever it starts. I don't even know. I don't know when it's starting.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the big questions right now. I mean, Manfred says expect spring training on time, expect opening day on time, but at the same time, here we are. Obviously, the pandemic is nowhere near past, and we're what 80% of free agents have yet to be signed as of January 15th or whatever. I heard the stat last.
Yeah, I think it's about 80%, and it just speaks to the physical problem throughout the league. Thanks to no fans being in the ballpark and revenue just being sharply down. Um, you know, look at all these people they're getting. They retired out at MLB, and that they're probably gonna, they're gonna lay off the difference there, and that's just in the league office where, having worked there for almost 6 years. I mean, I remember that money wheel was spinning, and it didn't matter what anything costs, and now suddenly the money wheel stopped spinning. And you've seen that in the league. You've seen that with most clubs, with the exception of the Mets. And the players are really paying the price for it. Because their demands aren't being met, and teams are reluctant to invest anything into their rosters at this point, including teams with glaring needs like the Phillies, right? I mean, they haven't done anything. The Yankees only now have done a few things, but they're basically as good as they were last year on paper. And Kluber, as great of a history as he has, is a question mark in and of himself. So the Yankees have really been stagnant. Everybody's been stagnant. The Mets have been the most active team in the league, and that's mostly because they haven't suffered from the losses that the league experienced over the last 12 months. And you have a new owner with new money. He didn't lose anything last year. He was making money. Market was great last year for Steve Cohen. So the Mets, I said at the beginning, in November when he took over, I said the Mets are coming in with a strategic financial advantage. And it's unfortunate for the other teams. Like, you want to see the other teams invest in their rosters. You want to see them become more competitive, and other teams that are really good, like the Rays, take the next step. And what do? They turn around and trade a Cy Young Award winner. They're not willing to invest in the roster. So that's just being maybe an expected example, but the Phillies have needs, they're not addressing them. The Nationals, they're taking small measures to improve the roster. So they signed Kyle Schwarber in the last week. It was a flawed player. You're just not seeing those moves being made, and it's sad, and it's even more concerning because there's an expiring CBA coming up, and what's ahead for 2022, especially after a lost year financially, well, lost year in general in 2020, plus who the hell knows what's going to happen with fans and when the season starts in 2021. Then you have the risk of another work stoppage in 2022. That could be a killer for a lot of these clubs, especially the small market clubs that like, I don't want to, I'll use the Marlins as an example. They have a hard enough problem to drawing fans. What do they do without the revenue sharing, without the maximum revenue sharing? You can't share revenue you don't have, so, or share money you don't have, I should say. So it's going to be fascinating over the next few months to see what happens. I sure hope that they can agree to a new CBA and not have a work stoppage next year. It's the last thing they need.
Well, with those remaining free agents outstanding, what do you think the more likely scenario is, that guys sit out that year and see what 2022 looks like, or guys taking the 1-year deal to prove their worth?
It's a good question, because I think the pandemic and the state of the pandemic would dictate whether or not a player would choose to sit out for that reason. I'm going to assume that opt-out will be available to players again this year, until I hear otherwise anyway. And there could be a lot of players, the high risk, especially the players with high risk factors, pre-existing conditions, they might very well sit out. Marcus Stroman is an example of that, where he chose his walk year to sit out, and then he turned around and took the qualifying offer. Now that's an easy enough decision for him to make, but what about players who might sit out or might get sick and are out for a long time, who aren't likely to get a qualifying offer? I mean, that puts them in a tough spot, especially when it's not exactly a player's market out there. It's I don't want to cry for millionaires, but in the end they want to play and they want jobs, regardless of how much money they make, and it's a difficult time for them to find that work. There's no question about it.
So last question from me, putting on our best Karnak hats, as it were. What direction do the Mets go between now and whenever spring training opens?
I'm still pretty confident they're going to sign Springer. I almost feel more confident they're going to sign Springer over Hand, even though there seems to be a lot of momentum for them to sign Hand. I just still feel like Springer fills a primary need. It's not to say they don't need Hand and a left-handed reliever, but Springer should be, in my opinion anyway, the top choice over the two, because there are options if they sign Springer and want to limit the amount they spend on a left-handed reliever. They can always turn back to Justin Wilson, who is really, really good, by the way, and would be great for this roster, and they need him. If they can't sign Hand. Now, Hand's better. Hand can close, and he does a whole hell of a lot to shorten the game, more than Wilson. But that doesn't mean Wilson, wouldn't be a welcome addition, to this roster. So I do think ultimately they'll sign Springer. I don't know if they'll sign Springer and Hand, but I think they'll sign Springer and a left-handed reliever.
Last one for me, my friend. I see you got the right wing all taped up there. You going to be ready for spring training?
Nah. Well, I had that same procedure that Jacob deGrom recently had. It was a nerve transposition surgery. He says 3 months. I had the surgery mid-December, and it feels pretty good. It's not terrible. It's tight. It's just I'm a world of mess. Physically. This is just the latest chapter in my problems, but it feels good. This is mostly really just take the load off the tendon. I also have the torn UCL problem, but they didn't operate on that. I didn't want, we opted not to do that. So this is really just trying to take some of that pressure off that area for, this probably for another week or so. And then I can, start to lift a little bit with it.
So I guess I won't be seeing any Michael Barron best shape of his career spring training tweets coming in.
No, not this year, unfortunately. I've been saying that for a number of years. Last year I had the Troy Tulowitzki hip, and this year I have the Jacob deGrom elbow.
I guess at least you didn't have them at the same time, I guess.
Well, I did. I was hurting. I hurt my hip in 2016. And I went 3 years, really struggling with it, and I finally just had to do something about it. But about a year before the hip surgery, I was traveling. I went to lift my luggage, and I popped this elbow. And and it came out. It didn't really do anything about it, which is probably why I'm in this. But I had this past summer, it was just to the point where I couldn't even lift a cup of coffee. And then we did the MRI. It showed the nerve issue, showed the 2 tears in the UCL, and there was some tennis elbow in there. So I went in there, fixed the nerve, fixed the tennis elbow, and I expect that the UCL will be a non-factor. That's what the doctor said. And this is HSS, and I trust HSS. That's not a plug for them, by the way. That's just how I feel.
So you're rolling the dice Tanaka style. Got it.
Yeah. And Seth Lugo style and Tanaka style.
Yep.
Tanaka style, yeah.
So for those folks who want to, you always got good information, good opinions, and great conversation. Where can folks find you to join in on that?
Dobbs Ferry, New York. I'm just kidding. You can come to my house, I guess. We can do an outdoor social distancing met discussion. But actually, not before. I'm Michael G. Barron on Twitter, MICHAEL. A lot of people screwed the A and the E up, but it's MICHAEL G. Barron. But I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, that's it. I lost my train of thought.
Well, Michael, I think it goes without saying, we were discussing as you came on that you've been our most frequent guest over the years, and we have enjoyed every moment we've gotten to hang with you, and certainly appreciate the friendship that you have brought to the program and the information, and we'll always gladly have you back.
Yeah, and I'm glad we're doing this again. This was fun, and it's a video thing now. That's what I like. It lets me piss off some people with my black Met jersey today. This is
even us dinosaurs can evolve a little bit.
Look, I'm a traditionalist, but if I were to choose a black jersey, it'd be the road one with the gray pants. I always thought that looked the best among the combination. So,
That's fair. All right, Michael.
Hopefully Steve feels the same way, I think.
Yeah.
I think he does too. So does Pete Alonso, it would seem.
Michael, man, appreciate it. We will talk soon, my friend.
Yeah. Talk to you soon. Thank you again.
Yes.
Take care, buddy.
All right. Bye-bye.
Michael Barron joining us, and always fun to talk to him. I mean, it's the I look back at he's got to have been on the show at least 10 to 15 times over the years, and every one of them has always been great. And EJ, I tell you, it's funny. We look at the past couple of weeks. Even the depth signings the Mets are making look good. And that question mark that hangs over spring training and opening day, despite the words of Rob Manfred, because Manfred's never been wrong. It's like no. Opening day needs to be tomorrow. Tomorrow needs to be opening day. Even though this team is incomplete, we'll fix it on the go. I got to see these guys out there. I mean, that's the level of excitement I'm at right now. I don't know about you.
Oh, I'm 100% right there as well. I'm of the thought of, if they don't sign anybody else, okay, let's go. Let's go with what we got. And I think would still be very competitive. That said, I still do love the idea of the Springer. I'm actually still more in the Bauer camp than I am the Springer camp. I understand how much of an upgrade Springer is. I just don't know if he's a $20+ million upgrade, but I'm be happy to be proven wrong if that is the case. But if we do nothing else at this point, I think this team would be very heavily favored to win the NL East.
Yeah, I think the fact of the matter is I think the big problem is, Springer is looking for money that is probably commensurate in a normal situation.
Right.
In a normal year, in a normal deal, he's got 4 or 5 teams chasing him, willing to give him the 175 million or whatever it is that he seems to want. He's just not going to get that in this market right now. And I get that it behooves him to keep the Mets at the very front of that conversation, whether or not he's at the very front of theirs. I have no reason to believe otherwise, but there's certainly no guarantee. I think he is the question I think has to be asked, though, when you're going up to these 25 to 30 million, are you going to get 25 to 30 million more, or 20 to 25 million more in production out of him than Brandon Nimmo? And that's not to say that I think Brandon Nimmo is better than George Springer. I'm not making that claim whatsoever. But when you look at, the additional salary for the additional production, are you getting your money's worth? And my question, kind of the answer at that salary level is no, I don't think you are. And the same thing with Bauer. I mean, to me, I look at something like, somebody brought up the other idea, would you rather see the Mets spend less and get Jackie Bradley Jr. and Brad Hand? And to me, that seems like more reasonable use of money, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it's not our money, so who's to say? But I agree with you. I don't think that Springer is a $20+ million upgrade, and he's looking for length. He's looking for a long-term deal. I think if you really wanted to get Bauer, who's seeking out the highest AAV of any starting pitcher, I think he could be had on a shorter deal with an out, but you just got to throw the boatload of money at him. I think if you throw 35 million over 4 years with a 5th year out, I think he takes it. I just don't know if that's the best usage of Steve's capital.
Absolutely. Well, that'll wrap it up for this edition of the Happy Recap. We'll be back with you next week. We'll have another guest as well. Want to thank Michael Barron for joining us. EJ, have yourself a great week, sir.
You do the same, my friend.
Let's go, Mets.